My name is Nadine Hollis. I'm 41 years old, and 4 days after I wired $10,800,000 to buy back my mother-in-law's family hotel, my husband told me I wasn't welcome at his sister's wedding. He said it at our kitchen island, in the voice he uses for confirming dentist appointments. My mother thinks it's better if you sit this one out. She says you're an embarrassment. 9 years of marriage, 9 years of writing checks for a family that preferred I write them quietly. And that Friday evening, standing in a kitchen I paid for, holding a glass of wine I paid for, wearing a ring I paid for, I finally learned exactly what all of it had bought me. I said the only word there was left to say, noted. 50 minutes later I made one phone call, no shouting, no threats. 2 minutes and 40 seconds, start to finish. And what that phone call set in motion is the reason the Callowell family of Richmond, Virginia will never again say my name the way they used to say it. Before I go one sentence further, let me ask you for 3 small things, because this story is long, and it is worth your time. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. That's the first thing, and it costs you nothing. The second thing is this: stay with me all the way to the end. I mean that literally. Because in the last 20 minutes of this story there is a cardboard box that arrived at my office by accident, and inside that box was a single sheet of paper from 1954 that changed how I understood every human being in this story, including the woman who called me an embarrassment. I did not see it coming. You will not see it coming. And if you leave early, you will get the revenge, and you will miss the truth, and the truth is the better half. And the third thing, as you listen, when a moment lands, when you feel that little cold click in your chest, that means yes, I have lived that. Drop one word in the comments, just one. Type, noted. That's it, noted. It's the word I said in my kitchen, and it's the word that ends this whole story, and I read every single one of them. Last time I told a story here, my comment section filled up with one word repeated thousands of times, and I sat there at 2 in the morning scrolling through it, and I want you to know it did something for me I don't have good language for. So leave it, noted, and hit the like button, because it genuinely is the only thing that puts a story like this in front of the next woman who needs it. Alright, let's go back to the beginning, because you cannot understand that phone call until you understand my hands. When I was 13, my mother worked the linen room of a commercial laundry outside Petersburg, Virginia, and on Saturdays I worked it with her. Ruth Hollis, 5'4", 4 arms like a stevedore. A laugh you could hear through a cinder block wall. The plant ran hospital contracts and hotel contracts, and Saturday was the day the hotel bundles came in. We'd stand at a stainless table under a light that buzzed, and the carts would come rolling out of the tunnel washer steaming, and my mother would take one end of a sheet and I'd take the other, and we'd walk toward each other, arms out, like people meeting in a hallway. She had one rule. She said it every single time, the way some people say grace: check every seam before you fold it. She meant the linens. She meant that a hotel sheet has 4 seams and a hem, and any one of them can be split, and a split seam folded flat and stacked looks exactly like a good one until the moment somebody lies down on it. It took me 28 years to understand she'd handed me the only instruction I'd ever actually need. Today my company launders for 11 hospitals, 4 university systems, and 31 hotels across Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina. 840 employees, 2 plants. My name is on the side of 96 trucks. I have sat across conference tables from men who own 3 counties, and I can tell you, to the 10th of a cent, the cost of processing 1 pound of soiled hospital linen, including the water, the gas, the labor, and the loss. Money opens most doors in this country. I believed that for a very long time, because for a very long time it was demonstrably true. Then I married into Richmond, into a family that had a name where the money used to be, and I found the doors that money does not open. I know they don't open. I know it the way you only know a thing when you have personally tried it. I tried with 8 figures. What I'm going to tell you is what that education cost me, and what I did on the Saturday morning I finally graduated. Here's the thing about being raised without money. It teaches a bright little girl one lesson so early that she grows up believing she thought of it herself. You are kept where you are useful. Nobody ever said it out loud. Nobody sat me down. I just watched. The winter I turned 9, the man who owned our building knocked $40 off the rent because my mother started hosing down the breezeway and hauling everyone's cans to the curb on Tuesdays, and we stopped being late on the first of the month. And I filed that away the way children file things, without knowing there was a drawer. In 10th grade, I was allowed to stay after school in the biology lab because I washed the glassware and refilled the wash bottles, and that teacher, Mr. Alcorn, wrote the letter that got me the 2-year scholarship, that got me the associate's degree, that got me the loan. Be useful. Be more useful than anybody else in the room. Then they let you stay in the room. It is, I want to be fair, a magnificent lesson for business. I built an entire company on it. Nobody in my industry answers a phone faster. Nobody has ever once had to call me twice. But somewhere in the middle of all that, the wiring crossed. Useful stopped being a thing I did and started being a thing I was. I have never once in my adult life walked into another person's home empty-handed, not once, not a friend's, not a neighbor's, not a stranger's. I have never let another human being pick up a check in my presence. People have physically wrestled me for a bill and lost. For 20 years I called that generosity. My mother, who has never in her life been confused about anything, called it something else. We were at a diner off Route 60, and I left the waitress a tip that was larger than the meal, and my mother watched me do it, and she said, "Baby, you don't tip like you're grateful. You tip like you're settling up." I laughed. She didn't. She has spent 40 years handling other people's sheets without once confusing that with being invited into their houses. Her daughter married the finest family in Richmond and confused exactly that. I started Hollis Linen Services at 23 with a used box truck, a rebuilt ironer I bought at a bankruptcy auction in Danville, and my mother's rule painted on the inside of my skull. First contract, a 22-bed nursing home. $400 a month. I ran the route myself before dawn and did the invoicing at the kitchen table at night, and slept, on average 5 hours, for 4 years. At 27, I had 11 employees. At 31, I landed my first hospital system, and the night that contract was signed, my mother sat down on my couch and cried into a cup of tea, because she had worked that hospital's laundry through an agency in 1992, and they had shorted her 40 hours and told her to prove it. 18 years after the box truck, I hold contracts in 3 states. I say that without 1 ounce of apology. Every dollar has a work order behind it, every single one. My hands show it. There's a rope of scar tissue across the back of my right hand from a steam press when I was 25, and the knuckles on both hands are thick in a way that has nothing to do with age. For years I noticed wealthy women noticing my hands. I never hid them. New money, I eventually learned, is what old families call money that still has the labor attached to it. The way you'd say a fish came to the table with the head still on, they find it slightly indecent. They also, as it turns out, find it extremely spendable. But I'm ahead of myself. At 32, my company won the linen contract for a boutique hotel on East Carey Street. 91 rooms, a restaurant with a Michelin write-up, and a general manager who wanted his tablecloths pressed a specific way that I personally went in to learn. I was in the basement at 6 in the morning, counting cart positions and photographing the loading dock clearance, when a man came down the service stairs in a suit that fit him the way suits fit men who have never once bought one off a rack. He'd taken the wrong door looking for the parking garage. He looked at me, and at my clipboard, and at the carts, and he smiled like the morning was a joke the two of us were in on. That was Peter Callowell. Peter was 34 then, director of development at a small private college outside the city, which is a polite way of saying his entire profession was asking wealthy people for money. He was good at it. I want to be honest about him, because a woman who tells you her husband was a monster from day one is a woman telling you a story. He was not a monster. He was easy. He was tall and unhurried, and he listened with his whole face. And on our first dinner he asked me more sincere questions about industrial water reclamation than any person alive has ever asked. And I talked. And he watched me talk like I was the most fascinating thing anyone had brought into the building that year. He was proud of me in public. I'll give him that forever. Self-made, he'd say, presenting me at things. My wife built her company out of 1 truck. And people would make the sound people make, and I would smile, and it took me 6 years to hear what was wrong with the sentence. He said it the way you'd describe a documentary, something he had watched, something that had happened over there, to someone else, before he arrived in the theater and took his seat. There were other flags, small ones, folded neatly and stacked so they didn't look like flags at all. He straightened my necklace before we walked into rooms. Every room, not once, every room, for 9 years, a small adjustment at the throat, the way a man squares a painting on a wall before guests arrive. He taught me which fork, which vowels, which 4 charities in Richmond actually count, and which 11 are for people trying. And I let him. I was 32, and I was in love, and I had spent my entire life believing that rooms have rules, and rules can be learned, and here was a man handing me the rules for free. And here's the part I would rather not say out loud, so I'll say it fast. Some piece of me, the 13-year-old at the folding table, the one who knew what a split seam looks like, was thrilled. The Callowells of Richmond, a name like a brass plate. 2 governors, a pew, a street, and a hotel. 200 years of belonging in a city that was constructed, brick by brick, around the question of who belongs. I thought I was marrying into a harbor. I was submitting an application. His mother received me. That is the correct verb. She received me in the front room of her house on Monument, all portrait light and silver, and a rug older than the state of Ohio. Vivian Callowell is 68 now, which made her 59 then, and I will say this about her until the day I die. She was magnificent. Posture like an accusation. A way of holding a cup that made the cup look grateful. She had the specific stillness of a woman who has never once in her life been the person who breaks a silence. She asked me exactly one question about where I came from. "And your family," she said. "What is it they do?" I said my mother worked commercial laundry for 40 years, and I said the name of the town. I do not sand my mother down for anybody's parlor. I never have. Vivian's expression did not move. Nothing about her moved. She set that answer down the way you'd set down a fish knife you've decided you won't be needing, and she began telling me about the restoration committee for the churchyard wall. I almost admired it. You could have run a seismograph under that woman and gotten a flat line. It was 6 weeks later, at our engagement party, that I understood what had actually happened in that room. I was crossing behind a cluster of silver heads with a drink in my hand, and I heard her introducing me. "This is Nadine," she said. "She's in linens. In linens, 800 employees, 3 states, 2 plants and 96 trucks, and a payroll I have never missed in 18 years, including March of the pandemic year, when I ran 3 weeks on a line of credit against my own house to keep every one of them paid. In linens. She had filed me in a drawer somewhere between the florist and the man who resurfaces her driveway, and I stood there holding my champagne, and something in me, the girl with the clipboard, the girl who counts things, did the arithmetic she was always going to do. She just needs time, I decided. Time, and enough warmth, and enough usefulness. I had spent my entire life earning my way into rooms. I assumed this room was built like the others. That single piece of arithmetic cost me 9 years and $11 million. We married when I was 32, in a church Vivian selected, with a florist Vivian selected. In a ceremony she annexed one committee at a time. I picked my battles. I lost most of them on purpose. And I want the record to show that I won the only one that mattered. The seating chart came back from her with my mother at table 11, behind a column, next to a hard-of-hearing cousin. I took a pen, and I moved Ruth Hollis to table 1, at my right hand, and I sent it back with no note. Vivian reviewed the revision, and smiled the way ice smiles, and said, "How thoughtful." My mother wore a green dress she'd bought at a consignment shop in Colonial Heights and altered herself, and she was the first person on that dance floor, and the last person off it. And there is a photograph of her that night, laughing with her head all the way back, that has sat on my desk for 9 years. Now, before you decide I was a fool, let me tell you what I did right, because I did do one thing right, and it is the reason this story has an ending instead of just a wound. I fenced my company. I was already 11 years in when I met Peter. Hollis Linen was mine before he existed. And every instinct I had, plus my accountant, plus a flint-eyed attorney named Theo Brannick who has represented me since my first million and who has never once in 12 years said a warm sentence, kept it that way. The company, separate. The operating accounts, separate. The house in Church Hill I bought at 29, in my name, before the wedding, and never refinanced, never retitled, never touched. There was no prenuptial agreement. And here is the joke of it, the one I still think about at red lights. The Callowells never asked for one. It did not occur to a single member of that family that the risk in this arrangement might be running in my direction. The name was the asset, you see. I was the working capital. I saw the shape of it even then. I read contracts for a living, including the ones nobody writes down. I saw it. I noted it. And I decided that love would renegotiate the terms over time. That was the one clause I got wrong. You can fence a company. You can fence a bank account. I never once figured out how to fence the part of me that believed enough giving would eventually convert into belonging. That account stayed joint. That account stayed wide open for 9 years. The withdrawals started in year 1, and not one of them ever looked like a withdrawal. They looked like emergencies. And then, very smoothly, they looked like traditions. The first one was the churchyard wall, the same wall Vivian had described to me the day we met. $19,000. Peter sat on the end of our bed turning his phone over and over in his hands like a boy who's broken something, and I said I'd take care of it. And the relief that came across his face paid me better than any thank you I have ever received. That's the hook. Right there. If you're taking notes on how this happens to a person, it isn't the money. It's the relief. Then it was Camilla's master's program, my sister-in-law. $94,000 over 2 years, because a Callowell doesn't take on student debt, though a Callowell sister-in-law, apparently, takes on invoices. Then it was the family plot at Hollywood Cemetery. $31,200 for the ironwork, the resetting of 4 stones, and the tree work. I am, as far as I can tell, the only person alive who finds this funny. I paid to landscape the graves of a family of people who would not have let my mother in through their front door. And I paid it gladly, and I hand-picked the ironworker. Then galas, then auction lots, then the roof of Vivian's carriage house, then Peter's car, in the year his college had a bad campaign and his bonus didn't come. Every check was received the exact same way. A warm, brief, entirely complete thank you, and then a small silence afterward. Like a door being closed gently in another part of the house so that the staff wouldn't hear it. Money went into that family the way money goes into a poor box, gratefully and without introductions. And I kept writing them, year after year, because each one bought something. A warm month. A good Christmas. A stretch of 6 or 8 weeks where Vivian used my actual first name at dinner instead of arranging her sentences so she wouldn't have to use anything. If you have never been hungry for a family, I cannot explain this to you. And if you have been, I don't need to. 9 years. I financed a household that never once put my name on anything. And then, last spring, the hotel came on the market. But before the hotel, I owe you one sentence, because one sentence explains this entire family, and it was handed to me in my 3rd year of marriage at a Preservation Society gala. I had underwritten the evening, the flowers, the quartet, the bar, the tent. $41,000, and I'd done it because Peter mentioned in October that they were short. A reporter from a local lifestyle magazine, perfectly pleasant, notepad out, asked me what an evening like that runs. And I told her, pleasantly, because I come from people who answer the question they were asked. 90 seconds later, Vivian's hand closed around my elbow like a silk tourniquet and steered me into the coat alcove, and I want to be precise here, because it matters. She was not angry, she was instructive. She looked at me exactly the way a headmistress looks at a scholarship girl who has done well and is about to do better, and she said, "Money speaks, dear. A name is spoken." Then she patted my arm one time and returned to her party, spine first. And I stood in that alcove among 400 coats and understood several things at once, at speed, the way you understand a spreadsheet when the error finally jumps. My generosity was not, to this family, affection. It was noise. It was necessary noise, the way a generator is necessary at a garden party, essential, and kept behind a hedge, and never mentioned by anybody standing on the lawn. The checks weren't building a bridge into the Callowells, the checks were the fee the Callowells charged for tolerating the sound of me. I understood it completely. I filed it, and here is the part I would take back if I could take anything back. I decided it was a phase. Chapter 2 of the Scholarship Girl's Handbook. When the room resists you, give more. So I gave more. Louder, in the only language I spoke fluently, while working very hard on becoming quieter in theirs. If you had stopped me on the street in year 4 and asked what I was doing, I would have said, without hesitating, investing. My mother would have used a different word. But I had stopped running my books past my mother somewhere around year 2. And if you want to know the exact moment a person starts losing, that's usually it. You learn a family's real accounting at their Sunday table. The Callowell Sunday table seats 14 under a chandelier older than my hometown, and everyone has a chair, and the chairs do not move, and I sat in the same one for 9 years, third from the end, on the side away from the window. This particular Sunday, Camilla, my sister-in-law, 31, lovely, weightless as a ribbon, had just gotten engaged to a Renfrew, which in Richmond is roughly a ribbon marrying a flag. The ring was going around the table. It reached me, I said what you say, and my hands did what hands do, which is exist. And Peter's Uncle Whit, 3 glasses in, and genial about it, looked down at my hands holding that little velvet box and said, "Well, those are a working man's hands, aren't they? You could strip paint with those." And the table laughed. Now, I need you to understand something about that laugh, because it's the whole story. It was not a cruel laugh. It was worse than cruel. It was comfortable. It was the warm, easy, entirely relaxed laugh of 11 people, confirming something they had all quietly known for years, and were finally getting to say out loud. The way you'd laugh at a joke about the weather. Vivian smiled into her cup and said nothing, which is how that woman says everything. Camilla said, "Uncle Whit, stop," in the tone that means keep going. And my husband, the man who says self-made at cocktail parties like it's a decoration he picked out. My husband laughed too, not loudly, he wouldn't, just enough to be inside the room and not outside it. I looked down at my own hands. The scar across the right one, my mother's knuckles, arriving 20 years early, and I did something I had never done at that table in 6 years of Sundays. I started to slide them off the tablecloth and into my lap, and halfway down, some 13-year-old somewhere inside me grabbed the wheel. I brought them back up. I laid them flat on that white linen, both of them, palms down, scar up, knuckles and all, and I left them there through the entire dessert course like 2 signed affidavits, and nobody at that table said one more word about my hands, that night or ever again. It is the proudest small thing I have ever done in my life. If you have ever hidden your hands, or your accent, or the name of the town you're from, or the job your mother had, if you have ever tucked the proof that you built your own life under a table because somebody made you ashamed of the building, I want you to type it in the comments right now. Type noted. Just that. Because I read every one, and because there is going to be a woman scrolling past this at 1 a.m. who needs to see that there are 10,000 of us. And subscribe before you keep going, friend. Because the wire transfer is next, and you are going to want to be sitting down for what happens 4 days after it clears. Every family has a wound it dresses every morning, and the Callowell wound had an address and a marquee. The Callowell Hotel, 8th and Grace. 9 stories of buff brick and limestone, a lobby with a coffered ceiling and a brass revolving door, and a name carved into the stone above that door in letters 18 inches tall. Callowells built it in 1912. Callowells ran it for 4 generations. Governors were sworn in from its ballroom. There is a photograph in the Virginia Historical Society of Vivian's husband's father standing in that lobby in a white dinner jacket in 1958, looking like the concept of certainty. And in 1998, the Callowells lost it, because Peter's grandfather discovered, the way every generation of that family eventually discovers, that a name cannot be pledged as collateral, and the note came due. The family has never once, in my hearing, used the word sold. They say we let the hotel go. Passive voice. An act of weather. It changed hands 3 times after that. A regional chain, then a REIT, then a group out of Atlanta that put in a bad restaurant and worse carpet and let the ballroom go dark. And here is the detail I want you to hold on to, because it is the reason this story is mine and not somebody else's. Hollis Linen Services has held the laundry contract for the Callowell Hotel since 2019. I wash that building's sheets, 1,200 pounds of them, 3 times a week. My trucks are in that alley at 5:40 in the morning. My name is on the invoice that hotel pays on the 15th of every month. Vivienne knows this. Vivienne has always known this. And in 9 years she has never once acknowledged it out loud, because to acknowledge it she would have had to say the sentence, and the sentence was, "My son's wife handles our linens." Every Sunday after church, Vivienne Callowell walks 2 blocks out of her way down Grace Street, past that revolving door, not slowing, chin level, the way you walk past a person you used to be married to. And then last April, the Atlanta group put the building on the market at $10,800,000. And Vivienne Callowell, a woman who had never telephoned me in 9 years, who summoned me exclusively through her son, the way you'd send for a contractor, called my cell phone at 9 in the morning and invited me to tea. "Just the 2 of us," she said. She asked about my mother's back. She used my first name 4 separate times. She was warm the way the first week of March is warm, real, but you'd be a fool to plant anything. And I sat in that front room knowing to the decimal point what the warmth was for. And here is the confession this entire story turns on. It worked anyway. Knowing better did not help. Seeing the hook did not help. Reading the invoice printed underneath the smile did not help at all, because the smile was aimed at the exact account I had never learned how to fence. The girl who believed that useful, given enough time and enough zeros, converts into loved. That girl heard the kettle and thought, finally. Peter ran the campaign for 11 months, and he ran it beautifully, because persuading people to part with large sums is not his hobby, it is his literal profession, and I had married him. It came in waves, and each wave had its own brochure. First, the investment case. Richmond hospitality is undervalued. The building has good bones and terrible management, which is the best possible combination. Put it in the LLC, think of it as a position, not a purchase. Then the operations case, which was clever, because it was aimed at the part of me that is actually good at things. You already service that building, Nadine. You know its cost structure better than the owners do. You know what the ballroom could run at. Then the peace case. 1 transaction, and every cold Sunday, every seating chart, every in linens, settled, retired, paid off permanently. And then one night in October, in the dark, quietly, the case he had been saving. The one aimed between my ribs. After this, he said, nobody in that family will ever be able to say you're not one of us. And I lay there in the dark next to 9 years of wanting that exact sentence to be true, and I felt the last fence post come out of the ground. Ines Duarte has been my chief financial officer for 13 years. She reads my accounts and she reads my face, and she has never once been wrong about either. I told her over lunch in the plant office, with the tunnel washer going on the other side of the wall, and she put her sandwich down and looked at me for a long moment. "You're not buying a hotel," she said. "You're buying a chair, and chairs like that come with a lease, and leases get terminated." I told her I'd structured it so that couldn't happen. She said, "I'm not talking about the structure," and she picked her sandwich back up, having said the entire truth in 9 seconds, the way she does. I heard her. I want that on the record. I heard her, I understood her completely, and I proceeded anyway, because knowing your weakness and being free of your weakness are 2 entirely different net worths. But I proceeded my way. If I was going to buy a chair at the Callowell table, I was at minimum going to own the table. Here is how you spend $10.8 million on people you don't fully trust. The buyer would be Hollis Holdings, my LLC, title in the company's name. Full stop, no discussion, no exceptions. Vivienne would be named honorary director of the hotel for life. Her portrait back in the lobby. Her father-in-law's photograph rehung by the elevators. her name in the brass. The family would have the ballroom for the wedding, the reunions, the Christmas thing they do, all of it, in perpetuity, at no cost. What she would not have was a deed, no transfer, no trust in her name, not one line of ownership. And Theo Brannick, bless his flint heart, insisted on standard diligence language. The buyer could terminate for any reason or no reason at any point before closing, forfeiting the deposit. I remember initialing that paragraph. I remember thinking it was the legal equivalent of buckling a seatbelt in a parking lot. Routine, faintly silly, obviously unnecessary. Peter agreed to every single one of my terms so fast it should have told me something. I understand it now. The family did not want ownership. Ownership comes with property taxes and a boiler from 1961. The family wanted restoration. They wanted the name over the door and the walk down Grace Street to have a destination again. Vivian signed her occupancy and honorary director papers at her writing desk with a fountain pen, thanked me in precisely 2 sentences, and offered me tea from the good service. And I sat there and understood that I had just watched a queen accept tribute and sincerely, completely, mistake it for a tax that had always been owed to her. The wire went out on a Tuesday morning at 10:14. $10,800,000 from Hollis Holdings to escrow. Closing set for the 3rd week of June, deliberately after Camilla's wedding, so the family could announce the homecoming at the top of the season, in the ballroom, to 200 people. I watched the confirmation load on my screen. Ines stood in my office doorway and said absolutely nothing at industrial volume. Tuesday. Remember that it was a Tuesday, because on Friday evening, at my own kitchen island, I asked my husband a very small question about an envelope. But first, Tuesday night, because Tuesday night turned out to matter more than I knew. I couldn't sleep. Not anxiety exactly. Altitude. You do not move a number like that and feel nothing. Around midnight I went down to my office and opened the safe and took out the intake book. You need to know about the intake book. In a commercial laundry, everything that comes through the door gets logged before it gets washed. Date received, client, count, condition. Every stain, every tear, every split seam noted by hand, because when it goes back out, somebody has to be able to prove what shape it was in when it arrived. That's an intake log. My mother taught me to keep one when I was 13 years old, and I have never in my life gone a week without one. And since I was 23, I have also kept a personal one, same book. Cloth spine, soft at the corners now. 3rd one I've filled. Every personal outlay over $500, entered by hand, because my mother's other rule was that you don't actually know a number until you've written it in your own handwriting. Most of those pages are boring. Tuition for 2 of my root supervisor's kids. The furnace I put in my mother's house. A truck I gave to a man who'd worked for me 9 years and totaled his own. And then there are the Callowell pages. I sat in that chair at midnight and I read my own handwriting, line by line, for 40 minutes. Churchyard wall, $19,000. Camilla, graduate tuition, $94,000. Hollywood cemetery, ironwork and stones, $31,200. Gala, auction, gala, carriage house roof, vehicle, and at the bottom of the newest page, in ink from that same morning, $10,800,000. For 9 years I had thought of that book as a diary, a record of love, written in the only dialect I speak with any fluency. And sitting there at midnight I read it cold, the way I'd read a stranger's books in a due diligence file. And a completely different document looked back at me. Received, condition noted, count confirmed, and the column on the right, the one that in every intake log I have ever kept, says return to owner, with a date and a signature, blank. 9 years of blank. Any laundryman will tell you what a book like that is. It isn't a diary. It's an intake log. Things came in, nothing ever went back out. I didn't say any of that out loud that night. I closed the book, put it back in the safe, and went upstairs to bed. 3 days later, my husband said it for me. The invitations to Camilla's wedding went out that same week. Heavy cream stock, hand-lettered by a woman in Charlottesville who books 11 months out, gold edging, 3 separate enclosures, and a wax seal with the Renfrew crest on it. I know all of this in detail because Richmond knows all of this in detail. People photographed those envelopes and posted them like diplomatic credentials. The Callowell Renfrew wedding, 200 guests, the garden of a private club on the river, the social crescendo of the entire season. I checked our mail on Wednesday. A water bill and a seed catalog. I checked Thursday. A bank statement and a flyer from a gutter company that had misspelled my street. I stood at my own mailbox on Thursday evening, in that low gold light we get in May, and I gave that empty box every single benign explanation I had in stock. Married couples get one invitation, obviously. It probably went to Peter at the college. Or, wait, hadn't he mentioned something about the calligrapher being behind? The post office is what the post office is. I texted Camilla a warm little nothing. Saw the invitations online. They're gorgeous, so happy for you, with a heart. My phone showed me the word read, and then it showed me absolutely nothing for 2 days. From a girl whose thank you notes historically arrived before you had entirely finished handing her the gift. I mentioned the mailbox to Ines at lunch on Friday. Breezy. Like a funny nothing. She did not laugh. She looked at me across the table for a long moment with 13 years of my books behind her eyes, and she said, "Ask him straight, Nadine, tonight. You have never once in your life been afraid of a number. Don't start with this one." She was right, and I knew it, and I drove home rehearsing a question the way a girl rehearses a speech at the bottom of a staircase. It's a very small question, as it turns out. Where's my invitation? You can carry a small question around all day. It's the answer that needs somewhere to sit down. Friday, 6:40 in the evening. My kitchen. I can tell you where every object in that room was. Peter, at the island in rolled shirt sleeves, opening a bottle of Barolo I'd been saving, because he liked opening the good bottles on Fridays. His week had earned it, was the reasoning, and in 9 years, I had never once audited the reasoning. Me at the counter with the mail I'd carried in, one more day of nothing in it, and I asked it lightly. I gave that man every single off-ramp in the delivery. Hey, Camilla's invitations are all over the internet, and ours still hasn't turned up. Do I need to go have words with our mail carrier? And my husband did not take a single one of the off-ramps. He set down the corkscrew, and he looked me in the eye. I'll give him that. Unlike his mother, he did it with his face pointed forward. And he said it in the tone of a man reporting a scheduling conflict. There isn't one coming, Nadine. My mother thinks it's better if you sit this one out. She says you're an embarrassment, the refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's sprinkler ticked around its little circle. 96 hours, I thought, with the calm arithmetical part of my brain that has made me a great deal of money, and that apparently does not switch off for anything. 96 hours ago I wired $10,800,000 to buy his mother a hotel, and he was still talking. I realized that at some point, he was explaining. It's one afternoon, Nadine. It's Camilla's day. Mom just wants it to go smoothly. Let's not make an occasion of it. Let's not make an occasion of it. 9 years. $480-some thousand of things. And one hotel with the family's name carved above the door, and the entire sum of all of it was standing in my kitchen in rolled shirt sleeves, asking me not to make an occasion of it. I looked at my husband for a long, quiet moment, and I said, "Noted." Here's what noted looked like from the outside, according to the outside. My husband's version, which he told his mother that week, and which she repeated to at least 4 people, and which found its way back to me the way everything in that city finds its way back, is that I nodded, picked up my wine, asked him what he wanted for dinner, and that we ate, and that I seemed fine. He told his mother I took it well. I want you to sit with that sentence for a second, the way I have sat with it. She took it well. What happened on the inside was quieter and considerably larger. Somewhere between the refrigerator and the sprinkler, a 9-year column of figures stood up in my head and reconciled itself. Every line found its true category at last, and the category was not love, and the account was not family, and the balance was not payable going forward. It did not feel like heartbreak. I keep waiting to be able to tell you that it did. It felt like the end of a month. It felt like closing a ledger you've been keeping open because you were sure one more entry was coming. I washed my wine glass at the sink, dried it, set it upside down on the rack, Check every seam before you fold it. And I told Peter I had a work call, which was in about 11 minutes going to be true. Upstairs, in my office, I opened the safe and set the intake book on the desk, open to the last page, to the fresh ink. 7:30 on a Friday evening. Theo Brannick answers his telephone on Friday evenings. I pay him partly for that. The call lasted 2 minutes and 40 seconds. He asked me one question when I finished. The one question he is paid to ask. You're certain? And I looked down at the bottom of the Callowell pages. 9 years of my own careful handwriting. $10,800,000 of fresh ink underneath it. And that empty right-hand column, running the whole length of the page. And I gave him the answer I should have given him 9 years earlier. I have never in my life been more certain of a number. The instruction fit inside one breath. Terminate the purchase. That paragraph I had initialed like a seatbelt in a parking lot turned out to be the single best afterthought of my professional career. We were 19 days inside the diligence window. The buyer, Hollis Holdings, which is to say me, could walk for any reason or for no reason at all, at the cost of a $75,000 deposit left on the table. Theo read me that number as a courtesy. I approved it inside one breath. And I told him the truest joke I have ever made in my life. Theo, that is the cheapest invoice that family has ever sent me. Notices went out electronically that night, to the seller's counsel, to the escrow agent, to a broker whose commission evaporated somewhere between his dinner and the 11 o'clock news. And $10,800,000 began its slow, unhurried, entirely procedural swim, back toward my account, minus the deposit, exactly as the paperwork had always said that it could. No shouting, no scene, a signature undone by a signature. People imagine revenge as fire, and I understand the appeal. But fire spreads, and fire gets photographed, and fire makes you the villain in somebody else's telling. What I did was closer to plumbing. I found the one valve that fed the entire fantasy, and I turned it a quarter inch to the right, and 11 blocks away, on the corner of 8th and Grace, a 9-story building quietly went back to being for sale, without making a single sound. And then, and this is the part nobody believes, though every woman who has ever finally decided something will believe it instantly, I went to bed at 10:15 and slept 8.5 hours, better than I had slept in 3 years. In my own house, purchased at 29, titled in my own name, next to a man who also slept beautifully, because he did not yet know that the world had moved. That weekend was almost tender, in the way last weekends are. Peter, believing that no occasion had been made of anything, was light as a boy. He whistled going out for the paper. He put his hands on my waist at the counter Saturday morning and talked about a trip to Portugal we would take someday, somehow. And Sunday evening he laid his suit for Camilla's wedding across the guest bed and asked me which tie, and I said the navy. And he agreed, the navy, and he was happy. And then he said the sentence that finished the job. I want it preserved exactly, because it's the one that made everything afterward easy. He said, "Oh, and if anybody at the college asks why you're not there Saturday, just say you've got a plant issue. Yeah? Nothing dramatic, let's keep it quiet, let's keep it quiet." His mother's catechism, arriving secondhand, out of the mouth of the man who had promised in front of 200 people to love me. She says it to me, and now he says it for me. And water takes the shape of the pipe it's in, I said. Quiet it is. And he kissed my forehead like a stamp coming down on a processed form. Monday and Tuesday I ran my company and I ran Theo's list in parallel. The joint checking account we kept for household nothings, the one my payroll deposits had never touched in 9 years, was quietly right-sized. The supplemental card Peter carried on my company account, the one that had purchased the suit currently hanging on my guest room door, was scheduled to sunset at the close of its cycle. Records pulled, 9 years of them, not out of spite, out of professional habit. When a partnership dissolves, you close the books properly. You log what came in, and you log what went out, and you sign the bottom. And here is what surprised me, and I mean genuinely surprised me. I kept waiting to feel grief. What I felt instead was competence. I wasn't losing a marriage. For the first time in 9 years, I was running one like something I was actually good at. The bomb went off on Tuesday at 11:40 in the morning, 11 days before the wedding. I know the time because I was standing on the sorting floor of my Chesterfield plant with a clipboard and hearing protection around my neck, and my phone started to perform in my back pocket. The broker had called Vivian with his condolences. Buyer terminated. Property returning to market. Such a shame, after everything. Within 40 minutes my screen looked like a casualty report. 14 missed calls from Peter, 3 from Camilla, who had not managed a text message about her own wedding invitation, but who found her dialing speed now. And 1 from a Richmond number I did not have saved, which I learned later, was Vivian's landline. 68 years old. 9 years of marriage, and the first time that woman ever personally dialed my telephone number was the day her hotel went back on the market. I let all of them ring out, except one. I took Peter's 15th in a supply corridor that smelled like industrial detergent and hot steam, which is to say it smelled exactly like my childhood, and I held the phone a few inches off my ear while my husband asked at volume what I had done. What was wrong with me? Did I have the first idea what this looked like? I let the fizz settle out of it, and then I handed him back his own Friday vocabulary, word for word, in the tone of a man reporting a scheduling conflict. It's a real estate transaction, Peter. It's one building. Let's not make an occasion of it. The silence on that line was the most honest conversation our marriage ever had. Then I hung up, finished my floor walk, signed my clipboard, and bought lunch for the second shift. If you're keeping score at home, say it with me in the comments. Let's not make an occasion of it. Sometimes the single most devastating sentence in the English language is the one they handed you first. Subscribe, friend. Because the tea with Vivian is still coming, and after the tea there's a cardboard box, and you have not seen the box coming. Peter came home that evening and auditioned every voice he owned. I sat in the kitchen, our apparent stage, and watched my husband work through his entire repertoire like a man flipping through paint chips at a hardware store. Anger first. I had humiliated his mother. I had embarrassed the family in front of the entire city. Did I have any idea what people were saying? I noted, silently, the verb. Embarrassed. It is remarkable how that family kept that particular word on a lanyard, ready for whoever needed it. Then bargaining. Reinstate it, Nadine. Just until after the wedding. We can talk about everything calmly in July. This doesn't have to be permanent. Then the victim. Did I have any comprehension of what that building meant to them, to him, what it was actually like to grow up in a family that had lost the thing with its own name on it? And his eyes were genuinely shining, and I'll grant this, it was the most sincere he had been all evening, and possibly all decade. I let the entire performance play itself out, and then I asked my one question, the only one I had, the one I'd been carrying since Friday at 6:40 in the evening. When your mother called me an embarrassment, I said, and you stood in this kitchen and delivered it, where were you standing, Peter? In here, with me? Or out there, with them? He opened his mouth, and I watched the answer arrive in his face a full second before any words could get dressed and come downstairs to cover for it. That's how truth works. It always outruns its clothes. He had been standing exactly where he had always stood. Wherever it was smoothest. He started in on nuance, on complexity, on you know how she is. And I stopped listening the way you stop holding a door for somebody who isn't actually coming. And very quietly, mostly to myself, I said it again. Noted. He didn't even hear me. Which was, I thought, perfect. He never once in 9 years heard that word do its real work. Richmond is a beautiful machine, and that week, I got to watch it run in reverse. Nobody is ever disinvited. Nothing in that world arrives as the thing it actually is. But I want to show you 2 rooms, because I could summarize this, and I'd rather you stand in them with me. Room 1, Thursday morning, 5:45, the loading dock at 8th and Grace. I do a route ride with my drivers 4 times a year, unannounced, because I'm the owner, and because I like the smell of a hotel basement at dawn. The general manager, a decent man named Curtis Ahn, who has run that building for 6 years, and who I have shared a thermos with in that alley more than once, came down the ramp in a windbreaker over his suit. He would not look at me directly. He looked at the cage carts. He said ownership had gotten some calls. That there'd been a question raised about whether the linen vendor relationship was appropriately arm's length, given the family situation. That they'd probably want to put it out to bid at renewal. Nothing personal, he said, nothing personal twice. $411,000 a year, that contract, not the biggest thing I have. But my trucks had been in that alley for 6 years, and a family that no longer owned that building had reached into it and pulled a thread with my name on it, 11 blocks from a house they no longer owned either. I said, Curtis, I'll have the bid on your desk before the deadline, and it'll be the best number you get, because it always is. And he finally looked at me and said, I know it will be. Room 2. That same afternoon, the Preservation Trust where I had held a funded seat for 6 years, funded, meaning I paid for it, meaning my $90,000 a year was the reason the seat existed. The board chair called me personally to say that they were regretfully restructuring the committee, and that the restructure was long overdue, and it had absolutely nothing to do with anything, and would I be terribly offended? I said no, and I meant it, which confused him. 2 couples we had dined with monthly went quiet as closed pools. The Trust's newsletter ran an unsigned little essay about the difference between donors who give from a love of tradition, and donors for whom, it grieved the author to say, giving is a transaction. 3 separate people forwarded it to me with no comment, which in Richmond is itself a comment. Vivian's hand was nowhere and everywhere. A breeze you can only see in the curtains. And I want to be honest about what I did in response, because it is the part I'm proudest of, and it is a list of nothing. I gave no interview. I wrote no post. I corrected no version of the story at any dinner table anywhere in the city. I let every invented Nadine they manufactured that month walk around unchaperoned. All I did was open my recurring payments file, the tidy annual pledges that had been auto-renewing my way into their world for 9 years, the gala table, the garden fund, the lecture series, the endowment for a chair in a department that had never once returned my call, and I turned off auto-renew. Not cancelled, just not renewed, each one as it came due, like leaves deciding it's October. I did not take my money out of Richmond. I want to be precise about that, because the version that circulates says otherwise. I simply stopped subscribing to the people in it who had unsubscribed from me. Ines asked if I wanted the pledges redirected anywhere, and I said, yes, actually, hold that thought. Because something had started assembling itself in the back office of my head, and it was wearing my mother's name. And on Thursday afternoon a cardboard box was delivered to my office. It was from the title company. 14 inches on a side, taped badly, a copy of a request I'd made 6 weeks earlier and never cancelled. The full archival due diligence file on the Callowell Hotel, deeds, surveys, an environmental report from 1988, 4 decades of tax assessments, and whatever the title company's paralegals had pulled out of the Historical Society when they went looking for the chain of ownership. I had terminated the purchase. Nobody had told the box. I signed for it, put it on the floor beside my filing cabinet, and did not open it for 9 days. Hold on to that box. I'm going to come back to it, and when I do, this entire story is going to turn over on its side. But first there was tea. The summons came by text message, which I found almost funny. T. Monument. Thursday, 4 o'clock. The second time in 9 years that woman had initiated contact with me, and both times there was an 8-figure building attached to it. She received me exactly the way she had received me at the beginning. Silver service, portrait light, that wrist. I admired all of it again, the way you admire a glacier from a heated boat. She opened with revisionist diplomacy. There had been, she said, a misunderstanding. The word embarrassment was Camilla's word, spoken under the strain of planning, and never, she wanted me to know this, never hers. And she watched me across the teacups to see whether the oldest trick in her collection would still find the hungry girl it had always found before. It found the chair empty. So she moved to the actual agenda, and I'll say this for Vivian Callowell until the day one of us is buried. When commerce comes onto the table, the woman does not blink. Reinstate the purchase, she said, close in June as planned. And she would personally see to it that I had a proper place in this family at last. The wedding, naturally, that goes without saying. And after the wedding, a proper place, there it was. 9 years of hinting and hoping and reading the room, and the seat was simply put up for sale, openly, at the precise moment the family's finances required the sale. I set my cup down, and I asked her the question I had been carrying since I was 32 years old. What place exactly would that be? The one that 9 years and $11 million hasn't bought? And Vivian Callowell looked at me, and for the first and only time in our acquaintance, that woman told me the entire truth. You can't launder your way in, dear, she said. That's what your kind has never understood. Your kind. I want you to hear it the way I heard it, because for one full second I did not hear the insult at all. I heard the craft. It was such a beautiful sentence. 2 verbs doing 3 jobs. 9 years of Sunday dinners compressed into 11 words. She had been building that sentence, I think, since the afternoon I told her what my mother did for a living. I stood up, I smoothed my skirt, and I thanked her sincerely, which confused her completely, because she was right. That's the terrible, freeing thing. She had been right the entire time, about all of it. From the first cup of tea in that room to the last one. Friday morning, 8 days after my kitchen learned the word embarrassment, I sat in Theo Brannock's office above Main Street while he walked me through the folder his people had built. Petition for divorce, financial disclosures. Mine were immaculate. The company predates the marriage by 11 years. Never commingled, never pledged. The operating accounts, never touched. The house in Church Hill, purchased at 29, titled solo, never refinanced. Not $1 in 9 years that couldn't be traced from its origin to its destination on a single page. Theo, who has seen every conceivable variety of marital wreckage that money can finance, tapped the edge of the folder and paid me the only compliment I have ever kept. This, he said, is the cleanest file I have closed in 31 years. Every gift already given, the wall, the tuition, the graves, the roof, the car, gone. Unrecoverable. Gifts are gifts. The law is not confused about this, and neither am I. I nodded before he finished the sentence, because I had closed that account myself, at midnight, over an intake book, 4 days before anybody said the word embarrassment out loud. Call it tuition, the truth costs whatever it costs. And unlike every other thing I bought that decade, it only bills you the one time. He asked whether I wanted the petition served. Process server, standard, Tuesday, and I heard myself say, no, hold it. I'll hand it to him myself. Theo raised the one eyebrow he permits himself in a calendar year. I said, he's my husband, he's going to hear it from me, face to face, in our kitchen. Because that is the entire difference between me and the family he chose. They subcontract their cruelty. I deliver mine personally, and it isn't cruelty, it's clarity, and after 9 years he is owed it. Theo closed the folder and said, in that flat flint voice, that it had been a privilege doing business with me for 12 years. Camilla's wedding was the next morning, and on Friday night, alone in my office at 11 o'clock with a glass of wine and nothing in particular to do, I finally cut the tape on that cardboard box. I want to tell you what I was expecting. I was expecting nothing. I was expecting to sort 140 pages of dead paper into a recycling bin and feel a small, clean satisfaction about the ending of a chapter. Deeds, surveys, tax cards, a boiler inspection from 1974, a bound photocopy of the hotel's operating records from the years the family still owned it, because the title company's paralegal had apparently requested the whole historical society file rather than sort it, which is how thorough people accidentally hand you things. And about 2/3 of the way down, in a folder marked simply personnel, was a payroll ledger. 1954, the Callowell Hotel. Handwritten, in columns, in a hand not unlike my own. Department, name, rate, hours. And there, in the linen room, third from the top, Prosser, M. Linen, .89 an hour, and 2 lines beneath her, in the same column, in the same ink, Prosser, V. Linen, .41 an hour, seasonal. Vivian Callowell's maiden name is Prosser. I sat in my office chair at 11:15 at night, and I did not move for a very long time. Her mother ran the linen room of that hotel, Margaret Prosser, 15 years, according to the ledgers, 1954 through 1969, and I found her every one of those years once I knew to look. And Vivian, V. Prosser, seasonal, 41 cents an hour, worked summers on that floor as a girl. Sorting, folding, almost certainly standing at a stainless table under a buzzing light, taking one end of a sheet while a woman took the other, and walking toward her. In 1979, she married Harlan Callowell in the church on Monument Avenue. And I have read that announcement, and I have read her obituary in advance biography, in the Trust's annual report, and I have read her introduction in 4 different gala programs, and in every single one of them her life begins at that wedding. There is no Petersburg in Vivian's story. There is no linen room, there is no Margaret. Her origins weren't erased by anybody else. She erased them herself, seam by seam, over 40 years, because that was the tuition the Callowells charged her generation, and she paid it in full, and then some. And then she stood in her front room in 1999, and again in 2017, and looked at another laundress's daughter, and she reached for the sandpaper, because it was the only tool anybody had ever handed her. I took no joy in it. I want that understood completely. I sat in that chair, and I felt something come loose in my chest that I had been carrying since a coat alcove at a gala 6 years earlier, and it was not triumph. It was the worst kind of sadness there is, the kind with no one to be angry at. I photocopied 1 page, and I put it in a plain envelope. And I went to bed. Saturday, 9 in the morning, June light all over the counters. Peter came downstairs dressed for his sister's wedding, charcoal suit, the navy tie we had chosen together in what now felt like a different administration, a boutonniere in a florist's box under one arm, and in his right hand, held a little too carefully, was a heavy cream envelope with gold along the edge. He set it down on the island between us, the way men set down peace treaties they expect to be thanked for. "Mom changed her mind," he said. "You're invited. Everyone's waiting on you. Camilla wants you there. The whole family wants you there." Beat. And then, in the gentlest, most reasonable, most Callowell voice you have ever heard in your life, the invoice, and if you'd call Theo this morning about the hotel, then everything's just whole again. Isn't that what we both want? Whole again? There it was at last, laid out on my own countertop in the morning sun. The thing I had wanted since I was 32 years old. A seat at that family's table. An afternoon of belonging. Gold foil. Hand lettering. My name presumably somewhere inside that envelope, in an ink that cost $11 an ounce. 9 years I had tried to earn it. And here it was. An arm's length away. Free. And I want to be very precise about what I felt, because this is the moment the entire story exists for. I felt nothing dramatic, no surge, no vindication. I felt the specific, unmistakable, almost clinical sensation of reading a term sheet and seeing, printed at last in plain language, the terms that had only ever been implied. He honestly believed he was repairing something. That's what finally made it easy. In that family's arithmetic, this was reconciliation. The seat restored, the wire restored, everybody whole. Love, invoiced, net 30. I looked at the envelope, then at my husband, and I said, "Give me 1 minute." I went to the safe in my office, and I need you to know that he thought I was going for the checkbook. I could see it on his face when I came back down. Even then, at the absolute end of it, watching me open a safe, the story that man told himself was that the money was coming. That's the whole marriage, right there. You don't need the other 9 years. What I brought back down was a worn cloth-spined book, a folder, and a plain white envelope. I set all 3 on the island, and before I handed him any of it, I told him about 1954. I said, "Peter, your grandmother-in-law ran the linen room of that hotel. Margaret Prosser, 15 years, and your mother worked that floor as a girl, summers, 41 cents an hour, seasonal, sorting sheets." He said nothing. He did not say it isn't true, which is how I knew that at some level, in some room of that house he grew up in, it had never been entirely a secret. I said, "She was me, Peter. 40 years before me, your mother stood exactly where I am standing right now, holding everything she had earned with her own hands, being informed what it was worth. And your family sanded her down so completely that she has spent 4 decades holding the sandpaper for the next girl. I'm not angry at her anymore. I refuse to become her. Those are 2 different sentences, and I need you to hear both of them." And my husband, one hand still resting on that gold envelope, honest confusion on his handsome face, said the truest thing he ever said to me in 9 years. He said, "But it worked, Nadine. She became a Callowell." I looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," I said. "That's exactly what I'm afraid of." Then I slid the intake book across the island until it touched his hand, open to the Callowell pages. "Read it," I said, and he did. I stood in my own kitchen in the June light and watched my husband meet, for the first time in his life, the entire 9 years in my handwriting, with dates. Churchyard wall, 19,000. Camilla, graduate tuition, 94,000. Hollywood Cemetery, ironwork and stones, 31,200. The graves, Peter. I paid for the graves. Gala, auction, carriage house roof. The car in our driveway that he had planned to drive to the club in 90 minutes. And at the bottom of the last page, in ink 6 weeks old, underlined once, 10,800,000. His face did something I had never seen it do in 9 years of dinner parties and fundraisers and Sunday tables. It stopped being composed. "I used to think this book was a love letter," I said. And the kitchen was very quiet, so I didn't have to raise my voice at all. I thought I was writing down all the ways I loved a family that was just slow to love me back. And then I read it cold, at midnight, 4 days before you told me I wasn't welcome at your sister's wedding. And I saw what it actually is. It's an intake log, Peter. Everything I ever handed your family, logged on receipt, with the date and the condition and the count. Every single line, and there's a column on the right side of every page of every intake book in every laundry in this country, and it says return to owner, and you sign it and you date it when the thing goes back. 9 years. And that column is empty the whole way down. I took the folder out from under my arm and set it beside the book. The petition. Signed, dated, complete. And on top of it I laid the last thing, the thing I'd carried down in my pocket. Not my wedding ring, that stays. I paid for it, as it happens, and it's very pretty, and my mother likes it. A pen, his pen, actually, the good one, from the desk in the hall, for the signatures he was going to need. And I said the 3 words I had been saving since midnight over an intake book. Return to owner. He looked at the folder, and the book, and the envelope with the gold foil, and his own 3 reflections in the marble. And then he reached for the one move left in the family playbook. "You can't do this today, Nadine. Today is Camilla's wedding." "I know," I said. "I'm not going. I was never invited, remember?" And then he picked up the cream envelope and held it out to me. Actually held it out. At arm's length. Gold flashing in the window light. The seat itself. 9 full years of wanting, 3 feet from my hand, and free of charge. And I looked at it. And I felt the hungry girl in me look at it too, and I let her look, because she earned that much. And then I put both of my hands flat on my own counter, scar up, knuckles and all, the way I put them on that white tablecloth 6 years ago, and I left them there. "That chair isn't for sale anymore," I said. "The tenant moved out this morning." Then I picked up the plain white envelope, the one I'd photocopied at 11:15 the night before, and I held it out to him. "Give this to your mother," I said. "Not today. Don't open it. It isn't for you." He stood in my kitchen for a moment longer, an envelope in one hand and an intake book in the other, a man holding 2 versions of the same family, and understanding, finally, that they had never once been different versions. And then he checked his watch. He actually checked his watch. He was due at the club at 10, and that, right there, was the eulogy. 9 years, $10.8 million, and it ends with a man looking at his wrist. The door closed. The house went quiet. My quiet. Bought and paid for and titled in my own name. And I said it out loud to nobody, one last time, and it finally meant what it should have meant 9 years earlier. Noted. The petition was filed on Monday. The divorce took 4 months, which is what happens when there is genuinely nothing to fight about, because one party spent 9 years refusing to blur a single line. The company, untouched, predates him. The house, untouched, predates him. The gifts, gone, and I had already booked them where they belonged. Tuition, expensive, paid once. Peter kept the car. If you're wondering how I feel about that, go back and read the line in the book where I bought it. Theo called our settlement conference the shortest of his career. Opposing counsel spent most of it reading my disclosures like a novel he wished he'd written. The hotel at 8th and Grace sold that November to a hospitality group out of Nashville. They restored the lobby beautifully, I'll give them that, and they rehung the 1958 photograph by the elevators, and they now rent the ballroom to absolutely anybody. Corporate retreats, quinceañeras, a regional dental conference last spring. $6,200 a night, and the Callowell name is available above the door to any human being on earth with a credit card. I did not plan that. I couldn't have. God has a sense of humor, and mine, as it turns out, just runs quieter. We won the linen rebid, by the way. Best number they got, same as it always is. My trucks are still in that alley at 5:40 in the morning. Vivian remains chairwoman of everything. The version of events in circulation, I'm told, is that I left because I never really fit in, which, when you think about it for a second, is the only completely true thing that family ever said about me. Camilla's wedding was flawless, by every account. I sent no gift, first time in 9 years. It felt like standing up after sitting too long. I never found out what Vivian did with that envelope. She has never mentioned it. Peter never mentioned it. Nobody has ever said one word to me about a payroll ledger from 1954. But the trust published its annual report in February, and somebody sent it to me the way people in that city send things, and I turned to the officer's page, and Vivian Callowell's biography, the same 11 lines it has been for 2 decades, beginning with her marriage, had one new sentence at the front of it. Born in Petersburg. That's all, 3 words. And I sat in my truck in a parking lot on Broad Street and cried for 11 minutes over 3 words about a woman who called me an embarrassment, and if you understand why, then you and I have had the same life. Remember the pledges I let lapse, and the thing assembling itself in the back office of my head? That autumn it got a name. The Ruth Hollis Fund. Scholarships for the children of laundry, housekeeping, and custodial workers. First generation to college. 60 awards a year. And a hardship line for families who need a car repaired in March so somebody can keep getting to a shift. We held the first ceremony in a rented union hall on Hull Street with folding chairs, a sheet cake, and a coffee urn. No gala, no gold foil, no donor wall, no seating chart, no committee. And my mother handed out every single certificate herself. In a green dress she altered herself, while 60 families took photographs. A reporter asked me afterward what the endowment totals, and I said, "We don't discuss numbers." And I heard Vivian Callowell's voice come straight out of my own mouth, and I laughed harder than I had laughed in 2 years. Because it turns out a name really is quiet, when it's the right name, on the right building. Here's what nobody tells you about giving without buying. It's cheaper, not the checks. The checks are identical. The interest. Nothing compounds against you afterward. Nothing accrues. You write it, and it's done, and you sleep. Enos runs the company as president now. I kept the chair, and I kept my Saturdays. I drive down to Petersburg and my mother makes ham and biscuits, and nobody at that table has ever once, in 41 years, glanced at my hands. A business magazine called last month. They're doing a piece on the woman who walked away from Richmond philanthropy, and would I care to tell my side? I declined politely, wished the reporter a good afternoon, and sat for a minute with the phone in my hand, smiling at nothing at all. Money speaks, dear. A name is spoken. She was half right, which was roughly her lifetime average. My money did finally go quiet, the day it stopped begging. But the quiet was never for sale in that city at any figure, Because quiet isn't purchased. It arrives, unbilled. On the first morning you have nothing left to prove to anybody, and then it stays. Last week at dusk my mother and I closed up the little storefront the fund rents on Hull Street. Ruth Hollis, 66 years old, bad back and a spine like rebar, insisted on doing the front windows herself, because she does not trust anybody's streaks but her own. So we did them together. Her on the inside, me on the outside, matching hands on matching glass, the radio going low, the way it went 30 years of Saturdays ago. Except this time the name on the door was ours. Here's the only wisdom I've got, and it cost me $11 million, so take it for free. Anywhere that only values what you can pay will bill you forever. And the people who love you for nothing are the only ones you can never pay back. That's my story. One empty mailbox, one intake book, and a chair I finally stopped renting. If you have been paying, in money, in silence, in apologies, in pieces of yourself, for a place in somebody else's life, take this as your sign to go look at what the lease is actually costing you. Check every seam before you fold it. Leave that one word in the comments for me. Noted. I'll be reading them tonight, and I read all of them. Hit like, share this with somebody you know who gives too much, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.